Welcome to True Echo, where every voice matters, and every story echoes with truth. Today's story begins in a small-town café, with a waitress and a billionaire CEO. It's a tale of power, arrogance, and a stunning reversal no one saw coming. You ever watch someone get too confident too fast, only to be completely humbled by someone they never saw coming? This is one of those stories. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end. The bell above the door of Old Town Cafe gave its familiar chime, cutting through the cozy murmur of early evening diners and the soft hum of a Motown tune playing from the jukebox in the corner. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon lingered in the air. Emily Davis, 19 years old with sharp eyes and a quiet strength, balanced a tray of plates as she weaved through tables like a pro. Her silver-gray apron, slightly frayed at the edges, still held the scent of hot fries and brewed beans. It was just another shift, or so she thought. At the corner booth, a man in a navy blue suit hunched over a thick stack of paper, his expression locked in a storm of frustration. Michael Carter. The Michael Carter. Founder and CEO of Carter Technologies. Emily recognized him immediately from magazine covers and the occasional business news clip that played silently on the cafe's TV. He didn't belong here. Michael Carter was a man of towering reputation in the tech world, known for building an empire from scratch and intimidating even the toughest boardrooms. He was infamous for his ruthlessness and strategic mind, someone who could smell weakness and capitalize on it in seconds. But today, something was off. Emily approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee and a glass of water, setting them down gently. "You look like you could use a refill," she said, her voice warm but unassuming. Michael didn't look up. His jaw was tense, and his eyes locked onto the dense legal document in front of him. "This is a merger contract." "Not a menu," he said coldly. Emily didn't flinch. "Sometimes menus are more complicated," she replied with a slight smile, her tone light but respectful. "You never know, I might surprise you." That made him look up. He stared at her with icy gray eyes, annoyed. Maybe he'd had a long day. Maybe he just didn't like being interrupted. Or maybe, like many powerful men, he was used to underestimating women like Emily. With a sneer, he picked up the thick contract and slammed it down on the counter beside him. The noise made a couple of forks freeze midair at nearby tables. "If you're so smart," he said, voice rising, "translate this." Gasps rippled through the cafe. Even the jukebox seemed to hesitate. But Emily didn't blink. She leaned forward, resting her fingertips lightly on the pages, scanning the first few sections with practiced eyes. Michael watched her, fully expecting confusion, maybe even embarrassment. Instead, her brow furrowed, then her eyes sharpened. "This clause here," she said, pointing to section 7, "it uses the word temporary in a key condition. That's not standard language for a binding agreement this large. It leaves room for withdrawal of funds without penalty." Michael's smirk faded. Emily continued, flipping a few more pages. "Also, the disbursement section is vague. If the other party decides to withhold funds, your company has no legal footing to fight back. These aren't just oversights. They look like traps." She gently slid the contract back across the counter and added, "You might want a second opinion. A real one." The room fell into stunned silence. Michael stared at her like he'd just seen a ghost. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking clock above the kitchen door. He quickly grabbed the contract and flipped through the pages she mentioned. His hands began to tremble slightly when he saw the language she flagged. Temporary. How had he missed that? More importantly, how had his entire legal team missed it? Stephen Mitchell, his top legal counsel and the man who drafted the agreement, had reviewed it for weeks. Michael had trusted Stephen for years. Yet a 19-year-old waitress, with no degree, no office, and no resources, had unraveled a billion-dollar legal landmine in under 5 minutes. Michael said nothing as he stood, left a $100 bill on the table, and walked out of the café, the contract clutched tightly in his hand. But just before the door swung shut behind him, he looked back. Emily was already behind the counter, calmly making a cappuccino, the steam rising like smoke from a just-fired gun. Her face was composed, but her eyes? They burned with quiet fire. Michael Carter didn't believe in fate. He believed in strategy, leverage, and power. But that night, as he sat in his penthouse suite, poring over the contract with new eyes and a shaken sense of certainty, he realized something terrifying. Emily Davis might be the smartest person he had ever met. And she was working in a diner. That simple encounter sparked something in him, not just fear, but fascination. Because in that single moment, everything in Michael Carter's perfectly controlled world had changed. And he wasn't ready to let her go. The next afternoon, as the Georgia sun dipped into its golden haze, casting a warm glow over Atlanta's streets, Michael Carter found himself back in front of the Old Town Café. He stared at the humble brick storefront from behind the wheel of his sleek black sedan, gripping the steering wheel like it might provide answers. In all his years of doing business, of outmaneuvering billionaires and politicians, he'd never felt like this. Off balance. Curious. Maybe even humbled. With a deep breath, he stepped out, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked toward the entrance. The bell above the door chimed again, like it had the night before. This time, there was no audience. The café was quieter, just a few stragglers sipping their late coffee. Behind the counter, Emily glanced up, and froze for a split second before continuing to dry a mug with her towel. She didn't greet him, didn't flinch. But her eyes, calm and unreadable, tracked his every step. Michael approached the counter slowly, like a man approaching something sacred or dangerous. He waited until the last customer left the register before speaking. "May I have a word?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. Her expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was guarded. "Would you like more coffee, or something else?" she asked evenly. Michael shook his head. "No. I'm not here for coffee today." He hesitated, then added, "I came back to thank you." Emily raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You don't strike me as the kind of man who says thank you often." "I'm not," he admitted, lips twitching into a self-deprecating smile. "But yesterday, you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my career." Her eyes narrowed slightly, still cautious. "It was just a suggestion." "No," he said firmly. "It was more than that. You saw what my entire legal team missed. That clause could have destroyed my company. $400 million. Gone." She stayed silent. "I don't know how you saw what you saw," he continued, "but I'd be an idiot to ignore someone with your level of insight." Still, Emily said nothing. Her eyes searched his face for some hidden motive. Some condescension. Some trap. He leaned in a bit closer, lowering his voice. "Emily. I'd like to talk. Really talk. Not here. After your shift. Let me buy you dinner. Or just coffee. I want to understand how someone like you saw what you saw." There was a pause so long that even the kitchen door stopped swinging behind her. Finally, Emily spoke. "Someone like me?" Michael froze. "That's what you were about to say, right?" she said, voice calm but cutting. "I'm a waitress, wearing an apron that still smells like bacon grease. How could someone like me know anything?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant. What I meant was, someone without formal training. Not in the system." She let the silence hang. Then, after what felt like hours, she sighed and nodded once. "Fine. Meet me here. 10 o'clock. After closing." Michael exhaled with visible relief. "Thank you." When he left, the bell chimed again, and for a second, Emily closed her eyes. 10 o'clock came quickly. The café emptied out. The chairs were flipped onto tables. The floors were mopped. And Emily was finally free of her apron, now sitting across from Michael in the quiet glow of a single table lamp. Outside, rain pattered gently against the windows. Inside, it was just the two of them. Emily stared out the window for a moment, then said softly, "I had a full scholarship to Emory." Michael blinked. "You did?" She nodded. "Law. Pre-law, technically. I wanted to be the kind of lawyer who fought for people like my mother. My brother. People who get steamrolled because they don't know the system." "What happened?" he asked gently. "My mother got sick. Chronic kidney disease. My brother, Danny, he started getting in trouble at school. Failing classes. My dad wasn't around. So I left. I dropped out. Took this job. Then a second one. Then a third." Michael listened, saying nothing. "I kept reading, though," she said. "Studied case law after shifts. Picked apart contracts just for fun. I didn't want to forget what I was supposed to become." Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You didn't forget. You just took a different path." She gave him a long look. "Don't patronize me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm offering something real." She tilted her head. "Such as?" "I want you to work with me. At Carter Technologies." Her brows shot up. "Not as an assistant," he clarified. "Not as a mascot. I want you in legal development. As a strategic analyst. You'll report to me directly." Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. "I believe in investing in brilliance," he continued. "And you, Emily Davis, are one of the most brilliant minds I've seen." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile crept across her face, but it was sad. Not joyful. "I've had offers before," she said. "From lawyers who saw me reading in the park. Professors who said they'd write letters. But every time, I had to walk away. Because life doesn't care about potential. It cares about survival." Michael leaned back. "Let me change that. Let me be the person who says yes. Who clears the path." She watched him. Carefully. Then finally, she nodded once, slowly. "I'll think about it." "Good," he said. "I'll be waiting." Neither of them knew that across town, in a sleek high-rise office, a man named Stephen Mitchell was sitting in his dimly lit office, a glass of bourbon in hand and a growing storm in his heart. He'd just received word that Michael had postponed the Kessler deal. And worse, that a café girl had caught the flaw he'd so carefully hidden. Stephen clenched his fist as he looked out over the city skyline. "I'll bury her," he whispered. "No one ruins my plans and walks away." The war had just begun. Stephen Mitchell was a man who had played the long game his entire life. Cold, methodical, and ruthlessly intelligent, he had built his position at Carter Technologies not just on competence, but on the art of concealment. For years, he had waited in the shadow of Michael Carter, biting his tongue, feeding Michael polished advice while quietly stockpiling leverage. But now, that empire he'd planned to seize piece by piece had been shaken, by a waitress. He stared at the glowing screen in his office, the merger agreement open, Clause 12 blinking back at him like a silent accusation. Emily Davis. He didn't even know her name until this morning. Now she had become the ghost haunting his every plan. At that moment, he made a decision. She would not only be discredited. She would be erased. The next morning, Emily walked into Carter Technologies for the first time not as an outsider, but as a new hire. The lobby gleamed with polished floors and mirrored walls that reflected ambition in every direction. Sharp-suited executives walked with purpose, barely giving her a glance. She carried her modest leather tote bag, nerves simmering beneath her composed exterior. But when she stepped out of the elevator on the 17th floor, those nerves hardened into steel. Waiting near the conference room stood Stephen Mitchell. He looked like he belonged on a courtroom magazine cover. Sharp gray suit, silver tie, and the smile of a man who'd never had to explain himself to anyone. His eyes flicked over Emily, and for a moment, he didn't speak. Then he extended his hand, too firmly, too slowly. "Miss Davis," he said. "Welcome. I've been told you're quite the prodigy." "Thank you," Emily said, not flinching under his handshake. "I'm afraid this morning's meeting is postponed," he said smoothly. "Legal's tied up with urgent board matters." Emily didn't miss the deliberate choice of words, "legal's tied up." "Meaning you're not part of that club yet?" She smiled politely. "I understand. I'll wait." Stephen gave a tight smile. "That might be a while." She held his gaze. "I have time." And she did wait. Hours. Until the meeting room finally emptied and she was shown to a small desk tucked beside the break room, not the office Michael had promised. But Emily wasn't easily shaken. She started working. Quietly, methodically, logging into the internal systems Michael had granted her access to. She began building the framework for a new platform she'd quietly envisioned in her notebooks at the café, a simple, accessible legal app to teach ordinary people their rights. She called it Lawbridge. Its concept was simple: legal empowerment for those without lawyers. Tenant rights, wage protections, healthcare forms, translated into plain language. The type of tool her mother would have needed to avoid the crushing medical debt. The tool she wished she'd had when signing away their family's dignity. But as she worked, strange things began happening. Her access would suddenly disappear mid-session. Files she saved were mysteriously corrupted. Meeting requests she sent to collaborators never got replies. After 3 days, she received an anonymous message in her inbox: "Don't get comfortable. This isn't your place." Emily stared at the screen, jaw tightening. It wasn't just corporate bureaucracy. This was sabotage. Late Friday evening, Emily stood outside Stephen Mitchell's office. The glass walls glowed dimly from within. She knocked once. No response. She opened the door. Stephen was seated at his desk, nursing a drink, scrolling through something on his phone. "I need a word," Emily said, stepping inside. Stephen glanced up, not surprised. "My access has been shut down 4 times this week. My files corrupted." "I know what this is," she said calmly. Stephen set down his drink and rose slowly, walking around the desk. "What exactly are you suggesting, Miss Davis?" "That someone's trying to make me fail before I've even started." He gave a low chuckle, all polite menace. "Emily, do you know what this place really is? It's a lion's den. It doesn't care about your dreams. It doesn't care that you read a few law books at night while bussing tables." "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said, her voice sharpening. "I'm asking for a fair shot." Stephen stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You're here because Michael Carter sees you as a PR stunt. A redemption story. But don't confuse that for power. This world doesn't open doors for people like you. It lets you in just long enough to enjoy the view, then it shuts them in your face." Emily's fists clenched, but her voice remained cool. "You can shut down my accounts. Block my emails. But the problem is, you underestimated me the same way your boss underestimated that contract clause." Stephen's smile faded. "And that," Emily said, turning on her heel, "was your first real mistake." That weekend, Emily didn't sleep. She worked through the night on a beta prototype of Lawbridge. She coded it herself, using open-source platforms. Created mockups. A sample scenario. A simulated eviction process walkthrough for tenants with no legal counsel. It was simple. Elegant. Clear. By Monday, she had it loaded on a tablet. When the company's all-hands legal strategy meeting opened that afternoon, Emily wasn't invited, but she came anyway. She entered the room quietly, tablet in hand, and waited until Michael arrived. His eyes lit up when he saw her. She gave a small nod. "Mr. Carter," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "May I present something before we begin?" Stephen stood up immediately. "This isn't the time for product pitches." Michael raised his hand. "Let her speak." Emily walked to the front. "This is Lawbridge," she said clearly. "A mobile legal education tool for everyday people. Tenants, single parents, immigrants, the elderly. It's built on accessible language, not legal jargon." She turned the tablet to face the room. A clean interface appeared, walking through a sample legal issue step by step. Stephen scoffed. "We're not a charity. We're a tech firm. How is this relevant to our goals?" Emily met his eyes. "Because every tech firm asks how to make profit. I'm asking how to make meaning. And meaning is what builds trust. Community. Longevity. Impact. If we give people knowledge, we create customers for life." There was a silence. Then, from the back of the room, one of the younger developers raised a hand. "I think she's right. This is powerful." Others began murmuring agreement. Michael smiled. "Stephen, I think it's time we stop standing in the way of innovation." Stephen's jaw clenched. Emily handed Michael the tablet. "This is just a demo," she said. "But if you let me build it, I promise it'll be something that matters." Michael gave her a proud nod. "You've got my green light. Full resources. Build Lawbridge." Emily exhaled, relief and resolve flooding her chest. Stephen Mitchell said nothing, but his eyes were cold, burning with quiet fury. She had just won the room. But Stephen wasn't finished. He never lost gracefully. The air inside Carter Technologies shifted after that meeting. For the first time, Emily felt something more than resistance, she felt momentum. Developers who had once ignored her now stopped by her desk. Designers offered to collaborate. Interns, coders, even marketing associates wanted to know more about Lawbridge. Word spread fast, the app was fresh, visionary, and, above all, human. It wasn't about profit margins or IPO hype. It was about impact. And people were hungry for that. But for all the quiet support blooming around her, there was one shadow that never moved. Stephen Mitchell. He no longer spoke to Emily directly. But she noticed things. Her data was being mirrored. Her office badge sometimes failed to grant her access to her own floor. She received anonymous tips warning her to keep her head down if she wanted to stay employed. One night, while working late on back-end architecture, Emily received a cryptic email from an unknown address. Subject, final warning. Message, the next time you walk into that boardroom, there won't be an exit. She stared at it for a long moment. Then, without blinking, she forwarded it to Michael. The next morning, Michael Carter convened an emergency board meeting. "This isn't just office politics anymore," he told the gathered executives. "Someone in this company is attempting to intimidate and sabotage one of our top contributors. And I intend to find out who." Stephen leaned back in his chair, arms folded, calm as a man sipping tea in a hurricane. "Michael," he said smoothly, "are we really taking anonymous emails as gospel now? What if this is all just a play for attention?" Michael's eyes burned into him. "You think a death threat is attention-seeking? I think a lack of proper vetting on new hires is inviting chaos into our ranks," Stephen replied coolly. Emily, seated at the end of the table, didn't speak. But she locked eyes with Stephen, and he looked away first. Michael stood, addressing the room. "Emily Davis has not only caught one of the most dangerous legal traps in our company's history, she has developed what could become the most socially impactful tool we've ever launched. This company stands behind her. And anyone who doesn't." He let the sentence hang. No one dared fill in the rest. The boardroom went silent. Stephen remained still, but his jaw was tight. Outside that glass-walled room, the stakes had just been rewritten. Emily poured every ounce of herself into Lawbridge. She barely slept. Ate meals at her desk. Reviewed every line of code herself, double-checking for anything someone could twist against her. The closer she came to a working prototype, the more alive she felt. One night, her phone buzzed with a call from home. Her brother Danny's voice came through, excited and rushed. "Emily. You're on the news." "What?" she asked, standing up quickly. "They're talking about Lawbridge. About you. And Mom's crying. Like, happy crying." Emily's throat tightened. "Put her on." Her mother's voice came through, soft and trembling. "Baby. I saw your face on the television. You look just like your father did when he passed the bar exam." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm doing it for you. For all of us." Her mother's voice broke. "You already have." After the call, Emily sat in the dim office light, staring at the glowing Lawbridge dashboard on her screen. The journey hadn't been smooth. And the next chapter, the launch, would be even harder. But for the first time since that cold, rainy night she gave up on Emery, she believed again. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was building something. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse suite, Stephen Mitchell stood alone with a tumbler of scotch, watching the news report replay footage of Emily's app reveal. She was on Good Morning Atlanta. Michael had called her a visionary. Investors were buzzing. Stephen turned the volume down, but he couldn't block out the words echoing in his head. "She's a leader of the future." Not long ago, that's what they had said about him. He walked into his home office, sat down at his desk, and opened a secure folder on his computer labeled, "Failsafe." Inside were files, doctored emails, staged conversations, falsified messages between Emily and a fake source alleging financial misconduct. He had crafted it all over weeks, just in case. A final trap. He would release it anonymously. A leak. A scandal. A fall from grace. Let her taste the spotlight. He would be the one to rip it away. The very next day, Emily arrived at the office and found her security badge disabled again. The front desk hesitated when she identified herself. "Sorry, Ms. Davis. There's been a hold placed on your account by legal." Emily's chest tightened. "Why?" I'm not sure." Upstairs, she found her access to all internal systems revoked. Her emails gone. The Lawbridge dashboard wiped clean. Panic surged, but she didn't run. She marched straight to Michael Carter's office. He stood waiting, jaw set, a printed folder in his hand. "Emily," he said, his voice unusually grim. "There's been a situation." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of the doctored emails, ones she'd never seen, implying she'd sold access to Lawbridge beta data. Emily's eyes widened. "Michael, this isn't real." "I know," he said, watching her closely. "But someone wants it to look real." Emily stared down at the papers, her heart racing. The lies were crafted with terrifying precision. Whoever did this knew every move she'd made. "This has Stephen written all over it," she whispered. Michael's eyes hardened. "I think you're right. And now, we prove it." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a flash drive. "Let's take down the real traitor. Together." The atmosphere in Carter Technologies that morning felt like a pot seconds away from boiling over. Emily sat across from Michael in his private office, the weight of betrayal thick between them. Her jaw was clenched as she flipped through the falsified documents one more time, trying to understand just how far Stephen had gone. Every screenshot, every timestamp, every fabricated thread, he had built a lie so precise it looked unshakably real. But he'd made one mistake. Stephen Mitchell had always underestimated one thing, Emily's discipline. "We need access to the internal activity logs," she said, her voice low but steely. "Every email, every IP address, every system access from the last 7 days." Michael nodded. "Already requested. IT is compiling the logs, but they won't hand them over unless there's a formal complaint." "Then file one," she said. "File it now." Michael smiled slightly, not in amusement, but in recognition. "You've got fire." Emily stood. "I didn't fight this hard to be buried by someone else's lie." That afternoon, Stephen stood in front of the board of directors, spinning his version of events like a seasoned manipulator. "With all due respect, we must hold all employees accountable," he said calmly, presenting the forged screenshots. "While I admire Mr. Carter's instinct to give this young woman a chance, I fear his loyalty has blinded him." The board murmured. Richard Collins, one of the older board members, spoke first. "If these documents are accurate, it would justify termination and potentially legal action." Stephen kept his tone measured. "I don't make this recommendation lightly. But for the protection of Carter Technologies, I believe Emily Davis should be suspended immediately, pending investigation." Michael remained seated, hands folded, saying nothing. "Not yet." Then the door opened. Emily entered the boardroom, a flash drive in hand and calm fire in her eyes. She walked directly to the monitor, connected the drive, and brought up the IT logs. Then she turned to face the board, her voice clear and unshaken. "The emails you were shown were fakes. They weren't sent from my machine or my account. The company's own logs prove that." She clicked through screenshots showing IP data, timestamps, and the MAC addresses of the originating device. The real sender was using a cloaked ID that traces back to this terminal. She paused and highlighted the exact ID tag. The terminal assigned to Stephen Mitchell. Gasps echoed around the room. Stephen rose instantly. "This is absurd. Anyone could fabricate these logs." "Except IT already verified them," Emily interrupted. "I had them run an encryption trace through the secure internal server. This isn't a theory. It's evidence." Michael stood slowly. "Let's go ahead and tell them everything, shall we?" He turned to the board. Stephen Mitchell wasn't just careless. He colluded with Kessler Corp. in a plan to sneak financial landmines into our merger agreement, designed to collapse Carter Technologies if we didn't bow to their terms. Emily found the clause he buried. And he's been trying to discredit her ever since. The room fell deathly quiet. Stephen's face darkened. "You're siding with her? Against your most loyal executive?" "No," Michael said, voice hardening. "I'm siding with truth. And the truth is, you almost cost us everything. You're done here, Stephen." Security entered a moment later. Stephen didn't speak. His pride was too great. But as he was escorted out, he looked at Emily with such pure hatred, she knew it wasn't the last time she'd see him. But for now, the shadow had fallen. Later that day, as Emily sat alone in her office, exhausted but triumphant, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello." A warm, confident voice came through. "Miss Davis? This is the White House calling." She blinked. "Excuse me. The president recently learned about your work on Lawbridge and would like to discuss a possible partnership. Would you be available for a call later this week?" Emily stared out the window, stunned. Yes. Yes, I'm available." "Good," the voice said kindly. "The country could use more minds like yours." When the call ended, Emily sat in stunned silence. From a tiny café with cracked tiles, to the most powerful office in the world. The arc of her life had bent. And it had bent towards something big. She turned back to her computer. The Lawbridge dashboard glowed softly, awaiting its next update. Emily smiled, cracked her knuckles, and got to work. But she knew this was just the beginning. Because every system of power has its defenders, and its enemies. Stephen Mitchell might have been gone, but not defeated. And the forces waiting outside Carter Technologies weren't just watching. They were preparing. 3 weeks passed. Lawbridge's buzz grew louder by the day. Tech blogs dubbed it the app that speaks justice. Community groups across Atlanta began testing the beta version, and early feedback was electric. Users marveled at how simple it made understanding complex legal rights. One woman wrote, "For the first time, I read a contract and knew what I was signing. I didn't feel powerless." Emily, now officially Carter Technologies' Director of Legal Innovation, was working around the clock, but she wasn't alone anymore. A dedicated team of coders, legal researchers, UX designers, and former public defenders had rallied to her vision. Michael gave her full rein and full support, even turning down lucrative tech contracts to keep the company's focus clear. The White House call hadn't been a fluke. A federal partnership was in the works, and Lawbridge was on track to be introduced as part of a national digital literacy initiative. A soft rollout in 3 southern states was already confirmed. Emily should have felt elated. But something wasn't sitting right. The threat of Stephen Mitchell still hovered like a phantom behind the walls. Though he'd been removed from Carter Technologies, rumors circulated that he had quietly joined a rival firm with ties to Kessler Corporation. There were whispers, emails forwarded with no signature, legal inquiries about Lawbridge's codebase, and journalists sniffing around looking for a scandal. Michael brought it up during a private meeting one morning. "You think he's trying to strike back?" he asked. Emily didn't hesitate. "I know he is. I just don't know how yet." Michael leaned forward. "Then we prepare." They doubled their security protocols. The Lawbridge servers were isolated from the main company systems. Access required biometric verification. Emily and Michael worked directly with a team of former cybersecurity contractors to safeguard everything from legal vulnerabilities to potential data leaks. Still, the storm came faster than they expected. One Monday morning, at exactly 6:02 a.m., a viral headline exploded across business networks. Breaking, Justice app Lawbridge accused of stealing government legal databases, whistleblower claims fraud. Emily's phone blew up instantly. Her inbox flooded. Social media turned toxic. Hashtags like #Lawbridge scam and #Waitress hack trended within hours. The article included a falsified whistleblower email claiming Emily had copied portions of Lawbridge's content from restricted government legal repositories. It was a surgical strike. Clean. Devastating. Designed to destroy not just Emily's credibility, but the entire foundation of Lawbridge. Michael called an emergency press meeting. Emily, pale but composed, stood beside him in front of a wall of cameras. "These accusations are not just false, they're fabricated," Michael said firmly. Emily stepped forward, voice steady. "I built Lawbridge from the ground up using open-source legal materials, state-by-state regulations, and original research. Every single file has a timestamp and a documented creation trail. And we will publish that audit by midnight." But behind the curtain, the situation was grim. Investors were panicking. Partnerships were freezing. Government representatives called off a scheduled meeting. The entire future of the app, of everything Emily had built, hung by a thread. "You're going to lose this," one executive told Michael. "Even if she's innocent, the stink of this thing will stick." Michael didn't flinch. "Then I'd rather go down standing beside her." That night, alone in her office, Emily sat with a hard drive full of metadata and a pounding heart. She knew the smear was Stephen's last card, and it was working. She opened a folder labeled Source Code Archive. Inside, every line of code bore her fingerprints, every legal clause traced back to publicly available data or first-hand interviews she'd conducted with community legal advisors. She had the proof. But she needed more than proof. She needed to expose the attacker. She remembered something from her old cafe shifts: always look at the receipt trail. Emily reviewed the fake whistleblower email again. This time, she didn't focus on the content. She focused on the metadata: headers, time zones, routing paths. A single line caught her eye: a subdomain tied to a data center in Bethesda, Maryland. The exact same facility Stephen's new firm had just leased. That was enough. She reached out to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years, Andre, a former Emory classmate turned cyberforensics consultant. Within hours, he helped her dig deeper. Together, they traced the IP address back to a private server known for laundering hostile PR leaks. The login key? An encrypted string tied to Stephen Mitchell's old Carter Technologies ID. Boom. Emily stared at the screen, stunned but unsurprised. The whole operation had Stephen's precision and pettiness written all over it. He hadn't just wanted to stop Lawbridge. He wanted revenge. Personal, humiliating revenge. She printed the evidence. The next day, Emily and Michael stood at the head of a press conference streamed to over 400,000 viewers. With cameras rolling and journalists buzzing, Michael opened with a statement. 3 weeks ago, someone tried to assassinate not just a product, but a mission. Emily then took the podium. We traced the origin of the leak. The IP address. The fake whistleblower. And we found the digital signature of a man whose only mission was to see us fail. She lifted the folder. These are the forensic receipts. And we're turning them over to federal investigators right now. Reporters exploded with questions. Michael added, Carter Technologies is also filing a civil suit against Mr. Stephen Mitchell and the firm that hosted his operation. This isn't just about Lawbridge, it's about protecting truth, innovation, and people who rise from nothing. The tide shifted almost instantly. Media that had crucified Emily the day before now ran headlines like CEO stands with young innovator, scandal revealed as sabotage. Lawbridge vindicated, cyber attack exposed by app creator. That evening, Emily received another call from the White House. Not only was the partnership back on, they wanted her to present Lawbridge at the National Technology and Equity Conference in D.C. Emily sat in her office after the call, stunned. Not because she'd won. But because she had survived. And there was a difference. Her story wasn't just about brilliance anymore. It was about endurance. And the battle wasn't over yet. The marble floors of the National Technology and Equity Conference shimmered beneath the soft golden chandeliers of the Washington Hilton. Banners bearing the theme, Building Tomorrow, equally, fluttered along the hallways as some of the nation's top minds mingled over coffee and policy briefs. But that morning, all eyes were focused on one speaker. Emily Davis. She stood backstage, her hands lightly gripping the edges of her tablet as she glanced out at the sea of journalists, government officials, tech leaders, and curious students. For a moment, she couldn't help but think of the cracked tile floors at Old Town Café. The burn of fry oil on her arms. The faded apron. The way people used to speak over her, not to her. Now, no one was speaking. They were waiting. A quiet knock on the side panel drew her attention. Michael Carter entered, dressed sharply, but his expression was softer than usual, almost paternal. You ready? He asked. Emily nodded, though her heart thudded like a drum in her chest. I don't know if they're here to celebrate, or scrutinize. Michael gave a small, knowing smile. That's how you know what you're doing matters. The stage manager signaled, and a voice came over the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emily Davis. The applause thundered before she even stepped out. As she walked across the stage, heels tapping confidently, Emily felt the room quiet into a focused hush. She looked out and saw more than power brokers and analysts. She saw her mother, seated front row, dabbing tears from her cheeks. She saw her brother Danny, now thriving in college, watching her like she hung the moon. She saw the reflection of every underdog who'd ever been dismissed, belittled, or told, "You don't belong here." She began. "A year ago, I was serving coffee in a small café in Atlanta," she said, voice clear but warm. "A man walked in with a contract, a frown, and more power than I thought I'd ever understand. He tried to test me. I don't blame him. People like me, young, black, underemployed, and female, aren't usually taken seriously. But when I read that contract, I saw a trap." She paused, letting the tension hang. "A trap that even the most expensive lawyers missed. That moment taught me something I've never forgotten: what you know matters more than who you are on paper." The room was still. Lawbridge was born from that moment. Not as a reaction, but as a solution. A platform to help regular people understand their rights, defend their families, and avoid being tricked by fine print designed to silence them. Emily clicked the screen beside her, and a projection appeared. Screenshots of the Lawbridge app now live in 27 states, with user growth in the tens of thousands. She spoke of community stories: single moms who negotiated fair housing contracts, elderly citizens who stopped predatory lenders, teenagers who understood their rights for the first time in their lives. We're not just teaching people the law. We're giving them power. And that power will ripple for generations. As the room erupted into applause, Emily caught sight of a familiar face. Stephen Mitchell. He stood in the far back of the auditorium, partially shadowed, arms crossed. His once flawless posture seemed diminished now, like a man realizing he had lost not just a game, but the chance to matter. She didn't look away. She wanted him to see this moment. She wanted him to know that the waitress he tried to destroy had just walked onto the biggest stage in the country. And stood tall. Later that evening, as the conference wound down, Emily returned to her hotel room and found an envelope slid under her door. Inside was a handwritten note. "You didn't just win, Emily. You changed the rules. M.C." She smiled. Michael Carter had always played chess. But now, he'd become her biggest believer. The next morning, Emily met with representatives from the Department of Education and the Department of Justice. Both departments offered full backing to implement Lawbridge in schools, libraries, and legal aid centers nationwide. A pilot program was fast-tracked. A public-private coalition was formed. Funding poured in. And suddenly, the little app she once designed on the back of napkins between diner shifts had become a national movement. 6 months later, in a packed community center in Selma, Alabama, Emily stood once more behind a podium, this time, launching Lawbridge's 50th local training hub. The crowd was made up of teachers, social workers, truck drivers, teenagers, and elders. People who had once felt invisible in the eyes of the law. Legal understanding shouldn't be a luxury, she told them. It should be a birthright. After her speech, a teenage girl approached her. Maybe 16. Nervous, twisting a bracelet on her wrist. "My mom and I used your app when our landlord tried to throw us out," she said, voice trembling. "We didn't let him. We won. I want to be a lawyer now." Emily swallowed hard. "You will be," she said. "And when you get there, I'll be waiting. We need you." They hugged, and Emily realized the truth she chased for so long. Justice isn't about grand speeches or courtrooms. It's about empowering people in silence, before the storm ever arrives. And that is the story of Emily Davis, the young black waitress who stood toe-to-toe with a billionaire CEO, and didn't just win, but changed the system. She exposed corruption, battled sabotage, stood tall against power, and created a tool that turned fear into understanding, and silence into strength. As Emily said, "What you know matters more than who you are on paper." If this story inspired you, if you believe in justice, courage, and fighting for what's right, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Echo for more real stories that shine a light on unheard voices. Comment below. Would you have had the strength to stand up like Emily did? Or have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.